This is the Vision 79 podcast, where my friend Sander and myself, Mason, discuss recent developments in our business and our personal growth. The name Vision 79 comes from our respective racing numbers. Sander's is 40, mine is 39, and together we have a shared vision for success in business and our personal lives. Many successful people have started small, just like us, but very few of them have documented their early years. They often say they wish they had, and given we believe in learning lessons from others, we intend to be the first to document our journey from start to finish. Today, we'll be discussing what makes a great legacy, what specific steps are necessary to build a long-lasting legacy, who throughout history holds the most impactful legacies, what we hope our legacies will be, and much more. But first, we like to start each episode with a brief update of where we're at in our business and personal lives so that when we look back on this in the future, we can gauge roughly where we're at in our lives today. So what do you have for your business update this week?
Almost nothing, to be honest.
Why?
Because we had a hurricane.
We did.
So my Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday were entirely taken up in buying plywood, filling sandbags, doing preparations, moving stuff to your parents' place that was valuable and whatever. It was supposed to hit us pretty bad.
Yep.
Ended up breaking up quite a lot, and we barely got what would be considered a tropical storm. So got overall very lucky, at least in this area. Mm-hmm. Very happy about that. Very happy that I now have the equipment to prepare for another future hurricane. But that was the first 3 days and change. I worked a little bit Sunday on it too, of my week. Yep. And then my Thursday and Friday and Saturday were mostly catching up on regular work because I took some PTO to do that stuff. So catching up on regular work, buttoning up some odds and ends of various little tasks in my personal life and whatever, and just kind of trying to stay a little bit afloat, as well as moving back all those sandbags into my back porch, taking down some of the plywood, cleaning up the house after all the sand and all that stuff, and cleaning the BMW with all the sand in it that I used to move my sandbags. So my business update is extremely minimal, if not nothing. So, but I am happy that I have all the materials now, and it will go much quicker second time around now that I don't have to run back and forth from Lowe's and Home Depot and Walmart and Target and all that shit to get stuff and prepare and whatever. So overall, it was a productive week, just productive in a different avenue. I think warranted preparations. It was supposed to hit us pretty bad, so I don't think it was a waste of time by any means. Especially, we will get a hurricane eventually. Yeah. So I think it was warranted in that sense, but not many business updates in that sense.
I would say it's still an improvement because the last 3 podcasts, you've spent the first 15 minutes tying your own noose, hating on yourself for not getting anything done. But this week you got stuff done, even though it wasn't a bunch of business stuff, and it's valuable stuff.
And I think I did get stuff done in the previous weeks. I just tend to look back on my week and then feel like shit about it for whatever reason.
Attaboy.
So, it's always a good little negative motivation to end your week off on a Sunday of recording.
But smell of cat behind you, right? Instead of cheese in front of you. Mm-hmm. Anyways, I have hurricane written in big bold letters because I didn't get a ton done either, but I finished up my research on the ADA compliance, the American with Disabilities Act. It's important for new businesses to adhere to all these guidelines or you can get hit with crazy lawsuits, not discounting the fact that you're also excluding some of your customer base if they do have disabilities. So ultimately, I think there's only a few minor things you need for physical structures, and there are a couple additional things for your website if you've got a website too, but I'm glad I looked into it.
Accommodate horses, miniature horses.
Yeah, if you have a customer come in with a therapy horse, then you have to make reasonable accommodations to the structure of your facility to let the horse in. So we'll see how that goes.
Will not be good.
All right. So I got the ADA stuff completed. I also looked into a little bit of Patreon stuff for Vision 79 because we announced last week we've decided we will never have sponsors on this podcast. That's not what it's about. It's about documenting. But we still would like to have a little bit of money to buy camera equipment and hire editors and things. So I'd like this to generate some amount of revenue, even if it doesn't go into our own pockets, if it just goes to the podcast. So we were initially looking into a Patreon, but what I found that a Patreon is like another platform for additional content, which subscribers pay to see. So if we did a Patreon, we would have to not only make additional content, but make it more valuable than the content that's here, and then charge people for it. So that's kind of like selling a product. And if we're going to sell a product, why don't we just sell merchandise that acts as advertising for the podcast anyways, and then we just keep the proceeds from that. And then if we want to, wherever we sell the merchandise, that website, we can just have a donation box there, like a pure donation, like just goes to the podcast if you want to help us out. I think that's probably the mark we're trying to hit anyways. So ultimately, through my research, I think I'm voting against the Patreon.
Cool.
Which was my own idea. So that's my business update. We are 2 weeks away, I think, from a major update. We're supposed to have a meeting in mid to late October with a big update.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for that, even if this week was taken up by the hurricane. Good things are on the horizon.
Yes.
And then for the life update, preparing for the hurricane, I had to spend more money than I was planning on this month, which fucking sucks.
Me too.
But like you say, it's a one-time purchase and then you're good for future hurricanes. And I thought about it. The options were either evacuate or stay. And staying cost me maybe $400. But evacuating, I think, would have cost me at least over $1,000. With the cost of travel and then eating wherever you're at for however long you are and traveling back.
I guess
think
you could have evacuated to your parents, right?
No, I mean, like, if let's say the hurricane was going to make landfall here first.
I gotcha.
Right. So even if I stayed with Grace's family in New York, I still would have to pay for travel. I'd still have to pay for food out there, even if the room and board costs are covered. But ultimately, I think it sucks having to pay for these things, but it would suck a lot more to have to evacuate, which we might have to do for a future storm. So overall, not that bad. Do you have any life updates?
Aside from the hurricane stuff that I went through, nothing much.
All right, cool.
I started the Porsche yesterday just for shits and giggles and to stretch its legs a little bit. But other than that, it's been almost solely hurricane prep this entire week.
Cool.
Hurricane prep and post prep, I guess.
Yeah, prep and tear down.
Tear down, yeah.
Anyways, today's update is on what makes a great legacy. We'll jump right into it. So I have a definition here. A legacy is something that a person leaves behind after they are gone. It can be material, like wealth or property, or immaterial, like the impact they had on people's lives, their contributions to society, or the values and ideas they had passed on. A legacy reflects how someone is remembered and how their influence continues to shape the world even after they're no longer physically present. So I have written here, great legacies are held by those who are so great in their field that they leave a lasting impact that outlives them. Mm-hmm. And I think that a critical component of leaving a legacy is it's not just doing something helpful, but it raises the bar or resets the standard of whatever field that they're in. So what's your take on what a legacy is?
The first bullet point I have down here is personal development and how it impacts others. I think that's a really fundamental core aspect of what makes a legacy, because you could have the greatest life and live honorably and have all these great values and virtues and do all this great stuff, but if you're alone in the Alaskan wilderness and no one knows that you exist, is that really a legacy?
Yep.
You know what I mean? I think legacy is unique because it is dependent on other people recognizing it. Whereas like a lot of the stuff that creates a legacy is personally independent, but the actual legacy as a whole is dependent on the other people around you, which I thought was really interesting. And some contributing factors to a good legacy or, a great legacy, I think are honorable actions, something that's, straight to your values and your virtues. And I don't think that necessarily your values and virtues have to align with like the greatest populist, your values and virtues don't have to align with what the populace thinks at that time is like the most popular belief, right? But I think it's really important to stick to what you think is valuable and right. And in that, I think pursuing truth and then sharing that wisdom critically is a really important part of that legacy. We'll get into later kind of examples of great legacies.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of those people not only were in the pursuit of truth or the pursuit of something better, but they were also pursuing it to share with other people around them, which I think is a really important aspect. Building yourself up in terms of like generational influence, of course, ties into that. But, the three that I've gone through so far, they're all personal things that you can do, right?
Yeah.
That's what makes the great legacy combined is just a bunch of personal things that you do that you then share with other people. And then, like you said, a body of work that people continue to reference, something that is, alive beyond the life of the individual person who creates it. And then within that, all those things is doing it with kindness, compassion, and in the pursuit of meaningful human connection with the people around you is kind of the core, fundamental aspects of a legacy that I think create it. Yeah. But do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have down, when thinking about what a legacy is, you automatically think of who it's tied to. And I very rapidly found a pattern in the people that I was thinking about. And these patterns are people who changed the course of humanity, big ones. So I've written down the Wright brothers will forever be known for the changes they made to travel with the invention of airplanes.
Right.
And then shortly thereafter, Neil Armstrong will forever be remembered as the man associated with the change of space travel, being the first person on the moon. I think that those two names will forever be ingrained in flight and space travel. And then similarly, others leave their legacies in immaterial fashions, right, in their way of thinking. So Nicholas Copernicus was the first person to introduce the heliocentric model, right? So the universe revolves, or the solar system revolves around the sun, not the earth. That was a totally different method of thinking that, like you say, didn't align with what everyone thought at the time. It's a new way of thinking. And then Socrates introduced the Socratic method of thinking, which introduced deep thought and self-reflection. So each of these people were a strong inflection point at that time in humanity, and some were obvious and some weren't. Because the first time someone saw an airplane, jaws dropped, right? But the first time someone heard of a heliocentric model, they wrote it off entirely. So I think that...
Well, not just that, they also tried to persecute.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're like, no, this is not just wrong, this is against the Christian belief, and this is dangerous, and you will be punished.
Right. And it wound up being true and totally changed the foundation of science. And there were so many inventions came rapidly after that in terms of astrology and space.
Yeah. Do you think there are some people who have formed legacies that we hear about today that may have not really deserved them as much as other people? Or do you think that inherently because you have a legacy, you are deserving of that legacy?
Like, are there people I can think of who have a legacy who I think aren't that big a deal?
Yes, that's part of it, but also potentially people that took credit for something or worked on something great that they actually may have stole from someone else, and no one would have known that because their legacy is so great. I'll give you an example. Thomas
Edison.
Yeah, Thomas Edison.
That's where you go.
Stole the light bulb from Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
Right? He also had a lot of propaganda against alternating current, AC current, which is used every day today. Your wall outlets are AC current. Alternators produce AC current. That's then, it's the converted to DC for the battery that charges to DC.
It's all Greek to me.
The alternator produces AC current, alternating current. Any sort of appliance in your house runs on AC current. And essentially what Thomas Edison tried to do was he took an elephant and he would shock it with a very low amperage DC current, and the elephant would be fine. And then he'd take a very high amperage AC current and the elephant would die. And this is like actual demonstrations that he would play out. And so his claim was like AC current is dangerous. But what he didn't tell people in those demonstrations is that, well, the amperage is different between the two. There's nothing unsafe about AC current versus DC current. It's just all about the amperage, because P power equals IV. So whatever voltage you got could be the same for DC or AC current. Your I is your amperage, the current flow, equals the power output. If that power output's higher, it's going to create more shock, which is obviously going to kill the elephant in this example. But I think back on those things, and I think back about my elementary school days where I learned about like Thomas Edison and like what he invented and how much influence he got. And then only later on, because I read a biography of Nikola Tesla, I actually got a bigger picture about what happened. Yeah. Do you think there are other circumstances like that we may not know about, or do you think there are people that are just kind of like lost to time that had great legacies, but we don't know about them because they got masked by some ruler or maybe just lost documents or whatever and stuff like that?
So I think there's a clear distinction. The first thing that comes to my mind are villains of the world that get a legacy for terrible acts they've committed, which I speak about later, and we'll get to that. But I don't think that's what you mean. I don't think you mean to say people who are famous for doing bad things, but people who are famous who don't really deserve it, like who didn't do... They weren't that special, but people talk about them as if they were anyways. I don't know that I can think of any historical figures, and I think the reason is because there's this really awesome quote that I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's something along the lines of history is written only by the people who won. So like if there's a war between two cities, the winner is the one who writes the history books.
Right.
So they'll always be seen as the rightful winners because they won, so they're going to write the history books as if they were doing the right thing. history is written by champions or something like that. So that may be a reason that I can't think of very many off the top of my head, because if you won that chapter in history, like the dissenting view isn't going to fight it. The one that I can think of that is more recent, not to get political, but is George Floyd, because he wasn't really standing up for the movement that then followed him. He wasn't taking action. He wasn't a critical thinker. He didn't get on a soapbox and inspire people. It was just the incident that happened to him that people then took his name and assigned to all of these different attributes. Like, if George Floyd were alive today, I don't know if he would agree or disagree with all of the different movements that people are using his name for. So I think that that might be kind of a false idol scenario, but we'll never know. Yeah. And I think ultimately, regardless of how people will think about him in the future, ultimately what you have to consider is he wasn't trying to start a movement when what happened to him happened. Yeah. Right? He was just trying to buy cigarettes or whatever it was.
Yeah. It's I think legacy is really interesting because, again, it's based on the perception of others and of how that name or that influence is carried through history. Right. For example, Michael Jackson completely changed the music scene. You know what I mean? Like, he completely revolutionized, performance art and music and like the culture around what he produced. But, after the sexual allegations came out many years later after he passed away, people kind of threw him off. I remember I met with one guy who loved Michael Jackson, and then the allegations came out, and he was like, I can't listen to him anymore. All I hear is like crying children every time I listen to his music. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I personally don't feel that way. Like, I still love a lot of the music that he produced. I think it's great music. But it's interesting to see how legacy is really determined on the perception of people, right? So it's like, it's almost like, even if you had a meaningful contribution like Nikola Tesla, and then Thomas Edison came along and snagged it and then put his name on it, right? It's almost like Nikola Tesla doesn't really have the same legacy, right? Just because people refer to Thomas Edison when they think about electricity and the light bulb and stuff like that. So I think there's an interesting discrepancy when it comes to that sort of thing. It's really about building something meaningful that other people also value and see. It's not just building something meaningful.
The Michael Jackson scenario is really interesting because regardless of what happened with the sexual allegations, compartmentalizing that doesn't change what he did for the music industry.
Right.
But people, I think, especially modern day, have a difficult time recognizing that two things can be true at once. Michael Jackson can have changed the pop industry, and he can also have been a pedophile. You can do great good in one area and despicable evil in another, and both of those can be true. Whether or not you like the person is wholly dependent on what category you're regarding them in. So you could say Michael Jackson was a great musician, but a terrible person because he touched kids. But you could also say Michael Jackson was a terrible person regardless of what he did for the music industry. And I think that, generally speaking...
Or you could say Michael Jackson was a great person because he revolutionized the music industry. Like, you can go any direction on that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's all about perception.
Exactly. I think it's all about perception. And that's an interesting dichotomy that we'll bring up in the segment about famous people. But would you like me to start segment 1 on how to build a legacy?
Yeah, let's dive into it.
Cool. So we talked about a couple people so far who have left a long-lasting impact on their field and our world. But I want to talk about what specific steps we can take to achieve that. It's clearly not only being the best at what they do, because no one knows the greatest checker player of all time. So what else is there? Let's break it down. I think that long-lasting legacies are comprised of two major items. The first is their level of achievement. They have to be breaking records or boundaries that have not previously been seen. And the second is their scale of influence, making an impact on others directly or by example. So, like you say, if you're in the Alaskan wilderness, you can be achieving great things, but no one will know that you're there. And on the flip side, you can influence a community by handing out soup to homeless people, but if you only hand out one soup a day, you're not really breaking boundaries here, so you'll be forgotten at the time. Those are the two attributes that I have.
Yeah, I think kind of what makes a great legacy comprises how to build one too. Excuse me. But I think that the first point I have down is having good self-reflection and authenticity. I think it's super important that even when you're wrong, you can admit that you're wrong and you can build past that, and then you can self-reflect on that mistake and then move forward, right? It's actually funny. I was talking about an old friend of mine yesterday with a couple of my other old friends, And we came to the conclusion that between like 18 and 24, people have a decision to either grow or they have a decision to just kind of think that they are the perfect version of themselves today and they don't need to grow or they don't have to grow. There is no, purpose there. And I think that people who really build great legacies continue to grow and self-reflect and evolve throughout their entire life. And I think that's what really builds the effect, that really builds an effective legacy, and it builds an effective framework that then lasts longer than their life.
Yeah.
Right. And then in correspondence with that, intellectual humility. Right. Like if you feel like you know something, you should always still be willing to listen to another point of view or someone else bringing up another point. Like even if it turns out that you disagree with them, there might be some value in what they present because it is another person thinking about the same issue from a different light, right? And then teaching and sharing with others, as you self-reflect and as you go through this intellectual process of trying to learn and grow, that teaching process allows you to spread it with other people through, a podcast or through your business or whatever. And then that's what builds your kind of network and community around you, which then also carries your legacy farther than just the time that you're alive.
Right.
But I think the second point I have is discipline and focus. You have to show up every day and do your part to grow and become the best version of yourself. And that takes sacrifice, it takes focus and practice. You have to be consistent with it. And I think that passion plays an important role in those parts because passion can be a driving motivator for you to, work on your consistency or work on your focus and stuff like that. So I think that, legacies stem from someone had a passion for something and then they continue to work on it and grow on it and grow on it and grow, and then it blossoms into something greater that then they can blossom off of even further with the help of the community and the people around them, right? And then some of the tools, I listed out some tools for how to build a legacy too. I wanted to give the audience kind of like a little rubric, I guess, or to, be able to attack some sort of, challenge to be able to work towards a legacy. But self-reflecting and journaling, utilizing some of the time management and focus skills that we've talked about in previous podcasts, developing systems for self-growth through accountability or reminders, stuff like that. Investing in yourself, so like taking courses and trying to learn about new things or trying to gain other people's perspectives by maybe listening to a podcast or a show or whatever that you may not have thought that you'd be interested in because it has a different view on life than you do. And then also sharing that wisdom or ideas, actively trying to share what you are thinking with the other people around you in order to, as a vehicle, to gain intellectual humility and to learn, teach, and share. Those are kind of like the building blocks of how I would think one would build a legacy, or at least how I think that we're trying to build a legacy in some senses, right? How do you think that your kind of tool pack, or how does your approach differ from that?
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the choice that people make between 18 and 24, because the male brain is fully matured at age 25. And your neuro synapses stop making new connections at the rate that they do when you hit 25. So the decision that you make between 18 and 24 sets you on a path of continual growth or being stuck with where you are once your brain is fully developed.
Yeah.
I think female brains develop at 23, or maybe it's 26.
It is a little bit younger.
Is it younger?
I think it's a touch younger.
Yeah, but around the 25-year-old mark is where people usually get stuck. And it's interesting because I have always wondered what role college plays in how people continue to develop. Do people who go to college and are continually learning as they get nearer to that 25 mark versus people who stop learning new things at 18 to go take a job in the blue-collar industry and are living the same day over and over again? I wonder if they go on to live lives of just like Groundhog Day, of the same day over and over again. I wonder if they're more closed off to change than people who are continually being taught new things as they get closer to brain development.
What do you think is the answer?
I would not be surprised if there was a correlation. That's not to say that all college people are open to learn and all blue-collar people aren't, because there are always going to be exceptions. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was some correlation in there. When I graduated high school, I had a job at a movie theater, and then I did a year at college, and then I did a summer working blue-collar with my friend who left high school to go straight to this blue-collar job. And I recall thinking at the time, after the 2 months I had worked there, I was like, oh, every day is the same here. And I had considered, man, in this past year at college, which has felt like a lifetime to me because I'm constantly being exposed to new things, my friend has lived the same day every day. And I continue to think about that through my years of college. And even when I graduated college, I was like, man, he's been doing that same day for 5 years now. That's heavy. Like at a certain point, like I would become depressed if every day were the same again. But if you learn while your brain is still developing, like, hey, this is what it's going to be like, then I think that you can accept it a little easier. And I think it's one of the reasons that I'm having such a difficult time accepting the office space. It's because every day is the same and I'm used to constantly shifting like new things. Because while my brain was finishing developing, I was being handed new information every day. So I thought that was interesting. I think that a distinction between your methodology for building a legacy and mine is a realization that I made early on when trying to think about examples of legacies. A lot of the points you made were really good and they're very positive, and I think it's probably the best way to build a legacy. But I don't think it's
I don't know if it's the best. It's just a way.
I think it's a good way, right? It's a productive way of doing it, and it's a virtuous way of doing it.
I tried to write something that was strategic. Like you can do X, Y, and Z, and using those tools, you can build something meaningful. That was kind of my strategy.
Right, and I think it comes from a place of wanting to improve and wanting to do better and wanting to. I got the vibes of it was like I want to help people and give to my community and better the world, right? But I very quickly realized when I thought of legacy, honestly, the first thing that came to my mind was the Holocaust. Because that is an unbreakable legacy that is like despicably negative, right?
Right.
So then I thought of, well, what's another legacy? And I thought of Rome, which has its ups and downs. And then I thought of Genghis Khan. And I was like, man, the legacies that I'm thinking of are not positive. And I have this realization that the legacies can be negative. The reign of Genghis Khan or the Holocaust are legacies that will not be soon forgotten. Each committed atrocities, or in their perspective, achievements, that have never been seen before, and each had immense influence on their communities. And what I ultimately found was I don't think the virtuity of your intentions matter. I think all that really matters to build a legacy is, are you going to do things that haven't been done before?
Right.
And are many people going to feel an impact from that? And that was a really interesting realization to me because I would not consider Genghis Khan or Adolf Hitler to be role models, but they did leave legacies, and in their eyes, they were doing what they thought was right.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Do you think there's more value to a positive legacy than a negative legacy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Why?
Yeah. Why is there more value in it?
Why is there more value in a positive legacy?
Because you're leaving something that other people can aspire for instead of cower from. So I'll use my example of the closest I can get to a perfect legacy is Michael Jordan, right? Everyone wants to be like Mike. That was the ads they ran in the early 2000s. Michael Jordan was a champion, a competitor, a gentleman, an athlete. He was spectacular in everything that he did. Only ever kind to people at the top of his game, total class, right? And yet still, people wrote articles accusing him of having a gambling addiction. And there's been nothing to substantiate that, but people just cannot cope with the fact that maybe someone isn't a bad person. Maybe someone who's good at what they do and speaks to a large community is actually good. And I think that when comparing Michael Jordan to Adolf Hitler, Michael Jordan gives someone something to aspire to be, which I think is much more difficult than giving someone attributes to avoid. I don't think it's very difficult to avoid hating Jews, but I do think it's very difficult to go to extra practices and lead a team and act every day as if it's the only day the world is going to see you. I think that's more challenging to do, and I think that leaves a positive impact for people to aspire to.
Yeah. I mean, I do see a lot of value in the negative legacies too, though.
How so?
Because like let's take Hitler, for example. He was someone that, went through a certain life path and went through a certain ideology to create his foundation for what he thought he should spend his life's work doing, right? And so now we can look at that and go, okay, this person was able to get empowered because of X, Y, and Z reasons, was able to commit these crimes because of these things that happened or whatever, right? And so we can kind of learn how can we mitigate or kind of smooth over the contributing factors that cause this person to rise into power and create all these atrocities. How can we communicate better? How can we figure out how to be more kind to each other, or coordinate more effectively nationally? Right? Like, there is a lot of learning potential from a really negative thing like that happens. And so I think that although those things are terrible, they do provide some value to learn from. And I think they're inevitable, but I don't want to say they're important, because I don't think that any sort of atrocity like that is like important for humanity to go through.
It can be important, but not good.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, but you can pull value from it.
I think you can pull value from it, but I don't hold the opinion that it's more valuable than a positive legacy.
I would agree with that too.
Yeah, I think that the breakdown of it is, I would say it's more important to focus on determining how the person in the seat of power can do good than focusing on how do we keep bad people out of the seat of power. And that's interesting, because I think that speaks a lot to politics today in terms of keeping bad people out and lifting the good people in the seat up. You can learn lessons from both, but ultimately I think that the larger impact will be had by uplifting the person of power than keeping a bad person out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You can. I think a good metaphor for that is the only counter to bad speech is better speech. Right. Like, you can't really counter bad speech by trying to silence it. You can't try to wash out their social media platforms or whatever. You can only counter it with better speech that then overrides and also, contradicts effectively what that bad speech person is trying to say.
Yeah.
So I would agree with that. What is the importance of sacrifice to you when it comes to building a legacy? Like, when you're thinking about building a legacy, I feel like it's easy for a lot of people to get distracted by all the different options around them, right? And so sacrifice plays a fundamental role, but how has sacrifice played a role in your pursuit of a legacy, or how have you seen it play the role in pursuit of other people's great legacies?
So the 2 points that I had for achieving something that hasn't been done before and impacting other people, it's really difficult to achieve something that has never been done before without sacrificing some part of your life. Just because odds are nobody has achieved the current standard without making sacrifice. So for you to go and do that without making sacrifice is very unlikely. And additionally, I think that in terms of an impact to the world, if two people achieved the same thing, but one of them had to sacrifice everything for it and the other didn't, I think that people will be more touched by the person who sacrificed something, because you're giving something up in service to achieve it. So I think that even if you're able to achieve the same thing, arguably, you could say that the person who didn't have to sacrifice to make that achievement was more efficient, because they were able to do it while not sacrificing X, Y, Z. But at the same time, left more on the table. Like, how much further could you have pushed the bar if you sacrificed more, if you gave more to it? What are your thoughts?
I think that to make exceptional change in the world, you have to make exceptional decisions, right? And you can't go about your life trying to be average and then expect great, amazing results.
Have you seen the Hormozy quote on that?
Yeah, that's what I'm pulling from.
If you want to be exceptional, you have to be an exception. You can't be average.
Right.
You can't be like everyone
exactly.
else.
Yeah. It's a different take on that.
Yeah.
Similar take on that same quote.
Yeah.
But I think you have to make decisions that are against the norm in order to produce something really great. And I think that's odd, because it's funny. I think it's funny because as you're going through that process, I think a lot of people try to persuade you to stick with the norm because it justifies their decision to stick with the norm.
Yeah.
Right? But then when you go against the grain and you actually end up producing something great, people then congratulate you on the great thing that you produced. But it's the same type of people that were then against you going for it when you initially started, because they wanted to justify their position in life. But then when you actually make it, they can't really deny the fact that you made it. So It's time to, I guess, celebrate. Like, that's always seemed like an odd discrepancy to me.
You've heard the quote on everyone will congratulate you when you have a baby, but they don't want to know how many times you got fucked to get there.
Yeah, it's that older guy.
I don't know. I just saw it on a Reddit
It's like an
post
older
once.
entrepreneur. He does a lot of like talks.
Yeah.
He's a shorter, older entrepreneur. He's a cool dude.
Yeah.
Yes, I have seen that quote. I've seen that quote.
I think that a lot of people go through their lives not really considering what legacy they'll be leaving. I don't think people think about it every day. And I honestly believe it's because people don't do anything important enough to leave a legacy behind. I think that you are only in the position to consider your legacy if you're going to be doing something impactful, right? If you wake up every morning, if you've got, whatever, if you follow 100 people on Instagram and only 100 people follow you, and you don't make any content and you don't do anything particularly special at work, how are you going to leave an impact? How are you going to leave a legacy? All you're going to leave is the impact that you had on your family members, if you have a family, and whatever name they put on your tombstone. And you don't even have control over that because you'll be gone by the time they make it. So most people, I feel, get through their life. There's a man who I work with, actually, who's coming close to retirement. And I was talking about some course we could take to learn something new at work. And I was like, oh, you should do it with me because I value your input as we go through the course. And he was like, I'm not interested in learning anything new. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, I'm at the point in my career now where I really just want to pass the information that I have on. I think I'm done learning new things. And that's a death sentence to me, grow or die. If you're not learning anything new, you're not challenging your brain, you're going to die. And I didn't tell him that. I was just like, okay. But I feel like a lot of times average people come to the close of their life and then want to leave a legacy, but you haven't done anything legacy worthy. Right. So if you don't think about it early days, you won't have one to leave.
What do you think is more important, passion or discipline?
When it comes to legacy building?
To building legacy, yeah. I feel like passion is really important to get you started, right? Like that's what gets you going. You know what I mean? That helps you find the thing that you're good at. It helps you kind of figure out what you like and how you want to pursue it. But discipline is what continues to motivate, I guess, or work you to actually build it. Right?
Yeah. I think it depends on the type of legacy that you're leaving to. So we'll get into that when we start talking about examples. But legacy in sport is different than legacy in history, right? So using the Hitler example, I hate that we're using this, but Hitler was passionate about what he did, and he was pretty disciplined, right? And I think that one of the reasons that he is still talked about today is because of the passion that he had. There was such visceral hatred for these people and such an egomaniac lust to take over the world that the passion is what drove him to hold those actions.
Right.
And on the flip side, discipline, like David Goggins is hugely famous and I think will be remembered for a long time for his insatiable discipline.
Yeah.
But I don't think that David Goggins will have the same impact on the world that Hitler did.
No, probably not.
Not the same impact. Sorry, same scale of impact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's easier to make an impact on the world with a negative legacy than it is a positive one? Like, is it easier to stand out when you're just a piece of shit rather than just like a really good, wholehearted person?
Yeah, a 19-year-old got on a plane one day, hijacked it, and flew it into the Twin Towers, and they will forever be remembered.
True.
And they might not have even had the plan that morning. They might have woken up that morning and just decided to.
Yeah.
It's way easier to make a negative impact. I have an answer to the passion and discipline one. I think building a legacy without discipline is impossible. A positive legacy, because you could wake up one morning and hijack a plane, right? That's not a good legacy. I think that it's impossible to do without discipline, but I think the longest lasting ones have passion behind them.
Fair point.
That's my thinking.
That's a good point. I think that's about all I have for how to build a legacy. I think we'll continue it on as we get into other great legacies and what our legacy will look like as well. But
yeah. So let's talk in segment 2 now about examples of the greatest legacies. Now that we've operationalized how to form one, let's see how it stacks up against some famous legacies and see if our ideas can apply. So I've got a list here that I want to run you through. And I'm going to say a name, and then I just want you to say whatever you associate with them, right? So the first one is sports. Mike Tyson. Boxing. Michael Jordan.
I was thinking of like the exact name, like what
the fighting style. Yeah.
Name.
Mike Tyson, boxing. Michael Jordan,
basketball.
Michael Schumacher,
Formula 1.
Tiger Woods,
golf.
Usain Bolt,
running.
Michael Phelps,
Swimming.
Let's do music. Beethoven, what kind of music?
Symphonies or classical music.
Classical. Elvis Presley?
Kind of like
King of
blues,
rock.
soul, rock into that,
Yeah.
morphing into that.
King of rock and roll. Michael Jackson?
Music.
King of pop.
Yeah.
And then Eminem, he's the rap god.
Rap.
So I have those people listed out for their sports. And these are people who are, if not then definitely in the conversation for the greatest of all time in their sport, right? So now I'll go back and I'll ask you, are you a regular watcher of boxing?
No.
Do you watch basketball?
No.
Do you watch racing?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Do you watch golf?
No.
Do you watch running?
No.
Do you watch swimming?
No.
Do you listen to classical music every day?
No.
Do you listen to Elvis Presley every day?
No.
Do you listen to Michael Jackson every day?
Probably once a week.
What about Eminem?
More than once a week.
Okay, so of the maybe 12 people I listed, 10 of them, you don't even watch their sport,
Right.
let alone those specific people, and
Yeah.
you still know their name. So do you know who Chris Bumstead is?
Yeah, the bodybuilder.
Bodybuilder.
He just retired.
He just
I've
retired.
never watched bodybuilding in my life. I still know that he retired.
Exactly. That's exactly the point that I'm making. I've been watching bodybuilding stuff recently leading up to the Mr. Olympia competition this weekend. And Chris Bumstead...
Didn't it already happen?
Yeah, it happened today.
Yeah. He didn't win, right?
He did win. He won his 6th Mr. Olympia.
Oh, he won.
Yeah, well, they have different divisions. So there's the open division, which is you can be any weight, just get huge. And then there's the classic division, which has different... at a certain point when steroids got fucking crazy, they changed it to be where they're like, hey, we don't want you to be as big as possible. We want you to be like physically appealing. So it's like tight waist, large chest, toned legs, whatever, stuff like that. I don't know the specifics. But it's a different weight class. You're capped at 240.
Old photos of him and videos of him from like the late 90s are fucking wild.
Of Chris Bumstead?
Yeah.
I haven't seen him, but this weekend was wild. He's stunning.
Yeah. But like I've seen some older videos when he was like really young, like maybe like between, I don't know, 19 and 21 in that range.
Yeah.
And like, dude, he was just like, he looked like a fucking brick. Like he was just walking down the aisle and he was like just a brick.
Square.
Yeah. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy shit.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I've been getting into the Mr. Olympia stuff more frequently because I saw a video maybe like 2 weeks ago. And there were 2 bodybuilders standing next to each other. One was Chris Bumstead, and then one was, his name is Ramon something. And I was like, oh shit, like Chris might not win this year because Ramon looks gorgeous. It looks like he could win. And the TikTok video overlay, the person was saying, Ramon looks way off this year. He's not going to win at all. And I was like, wait, I don't understand what's happening here because his arms look bigger. His legs look like the muscle flows. It like ripples one muscle into the other. And Chris Bumstead's looks more like jagged and separated, which is less physically appealing. Isn't that the point of Mr. Olympia? So I started learning about it. And no, they want to see the muscle separation because they want to see, like, have you worked the smaller muscles and are they visibly, articulated in your legs? X, Y, Z. So there's all these different things. And I was like, oh. And I'm realizing now that as an outsider, it's not very frequent that as an outsider you can look at something and not understand if it's good or bad. But I've gone through my entire career rowing knowing that I can see things that regular people can't. Regular people look at rowing and they're like, wow, they're doing it. But I know if it's good or bad because I have a trained eye and I don't have a trained eye for bodybuilding and I'd like one. So I started getting into Mr. Olympia. But it's a great example of not even watching the sport or being familiar with what's good or bad and still knowing the influence that someone has had on the sport. And if you watch even a single interview with Chris Bumstead, you can tell immediately that he's like a kind person. He's kind. Like, did you watch his retirement speech?
No, I heard it happen. But...
He's very grateful. He's very down to earth. There's not like a mean bone in his body, and he's this fucking huge jack dude. So in all of these people, they have achieved the highest level within their sport.
Yeah.
But each one of them has a different attitude associated with them. So like Mike Tyson's attitude versus Chris Bumstead's is totally different, and they're both at the top of their game in their sport. So for history, I have written down a few more, not particularly for what they've achieved, but for what their meaning is. So Gandhi, I have associated with peace. And Alexander the Great, I have associated with conquering, and Martin Luther King Jr. associated with unity, and Ford, Henry Ford, I have associated with automation in the industrial industry. So you don't have to be the best in your field. How is Gandhi the best at peace? What the fuck does that mean, right? It's not. It's just he touched many people with his philosophy, And that's what's most important, I think. So in sports, it's easy to touch your audience because you're doing a physical feat better than anyone else. But in terms of the historical impact, it's much more difficult to discern because you're not achieving a specific physical action. It's just, does your mindset appeal to a large number of people, and can you get it to those people?
Yeah. I think that we talked about this potentially on the Champions podcast that we had, but I know that we talked about it with the Australian entrepreneur that we had a Zoom call with. At least
Was he Australian?
Yeah.
I had no idea. That's so funny.
I'm pretty sure.
That's
Sorry
so
if I'm mistaken and you're watching this. I apologize. But he was talking about how guys who go into sports like have a vehicle to become champions. Like they have a vehicle to build a legacy, and it is literally like the sport that they are involved with, or whatever organization runs it, or whatever. And it's interesting for like entrepreneurs, or even someone like Gandhi or whatever. There is no real like vehicle to get there. You just kind of morph with your surroundings and spread your passion and your wisdom and learn from others, and then continue to do that religiously throughout your life. And then you build a legacy from that.
Right.
So there's an interesting discrepancy between like people who have sports legacies versus like, unity legacies, I would guess, like Gandhi or Martin Luther King or, people like that.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about sports is that their records are there to be broken, right?
Yeah.
So eventually, no one will know who Usain Bolt is after a long enough timeline, right? I really doubt, even if we get into like interplanetary travel, anyone will ever forget who Christopher Columbus is. Because that was such a major milestone in world history.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Do you think that legacies differ from country to country? Like if we went to Japan and we were like, do you know who Christopher Columbus is? Like, would people also like recognize who that is and understand who it is? Or do you think that there's a different group of people that have a different legacy depending on your location and your education?
I think that in the instance of Christopher Columbus, I would not be surprised if everyone knew who he was because America is such a new nation. But I think that in terms of specifics, that is not the case. So like, I don't think people in North Korea know or care who Tiger Woods is.
Yeah.
But that's, the victim of the circumstance that they're in. Right. Similarly, Kim Jong-un's great-great-great-grandfather, I couldn't name him, but I can tell you everyone in North Korea knows who he is and prays to him every night.
What's kind of crazy too is like, I think that you showed me this video a while back with this like young kid, like 7 or 8 years old, like going through this slideshow with his dad of like all the new like cool kid words, whatever. I don't know.
Gen Alpha words.
Yeah. Gen Alpha words. Thank you. And there's also, in juxtaposition to that, there's videos of guys going out and interviewing random strangers on the street of like basic facts about the U.S. Like how many states are there? When was the United States founded? Who was the first president? Like real basic stuff. And it's shocking to me how many people don't know it. And I'm sure that there's a large portion of that that's like disproportionately overlaid to make the video enticing. Like, in reality, there might be, 10 out of 50 people that don't know those 3 basic facts.
And they show
but those are the only 10 that are shown, right?
Yeah.
But it's still wild to me that there is at least a solid percentage of people out there that do not know these things, because I've gotten those videos on my feed consistently and I never see the same person twice.
Yeah.
Right? Like there is a large body of people that just do not have knowledge about that sort of basic thing. And I'm curious whether like either modern education or TikTok brain or like, just computers in general are kind of making people forget how to, remember information or pass on information, right? Like you can, at a snap of your fingers, you can have an answer through ChatGPT about almost anything that you'd want. Whether it's right or wrong is debatable, but you can have an answer relatively quickly, right? And so I wonder if that kind of evolutionary lifestyle that we're living is changing how legacies are carried, and it may affect future generations for how they think about legacies. Or like, it's really scary when you start thinking about what about like internet manipulation? Like Google, controls a very large swath of like our research capability. So it's like if Google decides one day to wipe Christopher Columbus off the map and make Joe Schmo, and Billy Bob, the guys who discovered America, like in a couple of generations, that Christopher Columbus legacy may not exist, because it's something different now. And I think that's a little bit scary, I think, in some sense.
Yeah.
But what do you think? How is legacy, how is the passing on of legacies changing as our technology evolves and how society changes? What do you think?
So it's interesting that you mentioned like maybe only 10 out of 50 people didn't know who the first president was. Have you seen the Veritasium video on the number that everyone thinks of?
7?
No, think of a number between 1 and 50.
Mm-hmm.
Are you thinking of 37?
No, I was thinking of 27, actually.
Okay. There's some crazy statistic that like 88% of people think of the number 37.
Really?
And Veritasium has this video where they go around asking people, and he shows the poll, and it's like of the, 500 people we asked, like over 400 answered 37. And I was like, what the fuck? So he's got this whole video breaking it down. But I hadn't considered that in other instances. I had always assumed like, oh, like they're showing you everyone that they interviewed, but that's not always the case. Back to legacies though. I think what's interesting is that eventually, I think ChatGPT will have a bigger legacy than Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or any Thomas Edison. I think that ChatGPT will just assimilate those. ChatGPT is a lens through which the next generation will see the world. So the legacy that Thomas Edison leaves behind will not be as powerful as the legacy ChatGPT has. I think that's interesting. But in terms of attention span and memory retention, I mean, I don't know. I feel like
it's really scary for me to watch kids today and like how short the attention span is, and then B, how wildly disconnected from like important shit they seem to be. Mm-hmm. Like the focus seems to be on like Skibbity Toilet or whatever the fuck that is.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't like what value does this add to my life?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's like why are you taking up your time and mental energy to learn about Skibbity Toilet instead of like business or like self-growth or like mindset or like understanding the people around you better or having like actual human to human conversation?
Yeah.
Like why is there such a change in that?
Yeah. I think that Joe Rogan made an interesting point, which is that the attention spans might not be getting shorter, but the quantity of quality content is increasing. So when you're watching something, if it's not a 10 out of 10 video, you can swipe for 30 seconds and find a 10 out of 10 video. So you can be watching something interesting to you, but it's not interesting enough because you know there's something more interesting around the corner. So that's why you swipe so much. It's not an attention span thing, it's a quality of information thing, which I thought was an interesting perspective. I don't know if I agree with it as someone with a short attention span. But I think that as far as Gen Alpha goes, I didn't start looking at, like, Skibbity Toilet is brain rot, right?
Yeah.
So are all the video games I played in elementary school, middle school, and high school. And so are all the TV shows that I watched, and even the car stuff that I watched, like Pink's. You've seen that TV show?
Yeah.
There's a time in high school where in math class I would sit in the back and just watch Pink's every class for the whole semester. That's brain rot. I'm learning something from it because now I know how drag racing works and how cars work. You don't learn anything from Skibbity Toilet, but it's entertaining because you can talk to your friends about it. And I think that the difference is I can pull value from the brain rot that I used as a kid, but it's difficult for us as adults to pull any value from the shit that the kids are watching today. And the person-to-person contact decrease is really sad to see because even if kids aren't learning about business or self-growth, that's fine. I didn't either. I just wanted to play video games with my friends. I get it. But now you're not even seeing kids want to play video games with their friends. You're seeing kids just want to watch YouTube and like live a solitary lifestyle, which is sad to see. Or sit down and watch a documentary. Like I don't know how many kids would sit down and watch a documentary long enough to know that there's a legacy out there. Right.
That's what scares me too, is like the attention span of some of the people I meet. Like I know that, I've had my moments of short attention span too. I know that sometimes you don't like watching the 30-second TikToks I send you. So like I get that like sometimes like attention spans vary based on like the interest in the video or whatever.
Yeah.
But like we both listen to long form podcasts every single day, at least multiple times a week.
Right.
Right? And it's fascinating to me how many people can't even sit through like a 30-minute podcast.
Yeah.
Like a small podcast. Like 30-minute podcast, that's like I get at the end of the 30-minute podcast, and I'm like, is there not more? Like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
what is this? Like, I expected at least an hour and a half.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really wild to me, and it's a little bit frightening, you know. And on the brain rot point too, it's like, what was the brain rot in 1824? It was like, oh, the brain rot is going to be, I'm going to figure out how to make a wooden boat to play with in the bathtub.
Yeah.
Like, that was the brain rot back then.
And that's still creative.
Which is creative, which is learning something, which is being ingenuitive, which is asking other people for help on how to do it, which is using tools, which is figuring out how to make it float or move better or go faster. Like, that might have been the brain rot then, because, you know, in 1776, you know, the adults back then would have been like, oh, well, that kid's not doing anything. He's building a little boat. I'm out here fighting a war or whatever, right? So it's like there's always the older crowd that looks down on the younger crowd for whatever they're doing and thinking that it's a waste of their time.
Yeah.
But I think that's really especially true now, because it's not just like kids these days have a different style of life. It's like they're actually disconnecting them from the fundamental values that make us human and make us connect together.
Yeah.
It's like completely disconnecting themselves from human connection, and then it's like, the phone is my best friend, or the tablet is my best friend, or whatever. And that's really frightening to me.
What'll be really interesting to see is, as these kids grow up, there are window lickers in every generation.
Yeah.
So there are kids that we went to school with who just went home and played video games every day, didn't go to college, and today are still licking windows, right?
Yeah.
And they always will, because and every generation will have those kids.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there are more window lickers now, or if the window lickers are just even worse. So I'm wondering, as this Gen Alpha grows up, will there be a generation of 40-year-olds where 10% of them are like serious individuals trying to progress the world, and 90% are still like doing fuck shit and like, you know, making memes at the office and stuff, and not able to hold down a job because their quality is so poor?
I think there are potentially more window lickers today, but I think that even more so, there is a larger discrepancy between the people who don't do anything and the people who do something.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the discrepancy is growing, and there's fewer and fewer people that are trying to do something really meaningful, and then there's a lot of people that are just, you know, bumming out their life doing whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think that in some sense that makes it easier for the people who want to achieve something, because the bar is lower. But I also think it can make it more challenging, because there are more people around you that are encouraging you to not pursue it, right?
Yeah.
It's that idea of like, oh, well, like, don't do that. That's risky. Like, do what I'm doing. Be easy, right?
It's never been easier to start a business, and it's never been easier to not start a business.
Yeah, exactly. But you went through some great examples of legacies.
Please.
I have a couple as well that I wanted to touch on.
Sure.
The first one that came to mind was Ayrton Senna. He's had a big influence on, you know, my racing passion and my drive. And a couple attributes that I thought of him that I thought made him great were not just his driving ability on track, not just his style, but also how he carried himself in public and how he gave back to his community in Brazil. I thought was, you know, it wasn't just that he was great at the sport. He was also great in like the other legacy aspects. He had that like bit of Mike Tyson in him in terms of sports stuff, and then he had that bit of like Gandhi in him to like give back and help other people. And I think that blend of the two really formed a great legacy for him. And part of me is also curious, like, would people have known about Ayrton Senna if he didn't hit that wall? Like, he was great, but like when you look at stats and you look at statistics, he did do really well, but it's like Max Verstappen has also done crazy, crazy well. And I'm curious to see, like, in 50 years' time, will Max Verstappen be remembered more than Ayrton Senna? And if that is so, maybe my theory about, you know, Senna's passing isn't true. Like, maybe that had nothing to do with his legacy. But if Senna is remembered more than Max Verstappen, maybe there's something like a martyr aspect almost, because Senna talked a lot about safety in the sport, and he vouched for safety that weekend. He was like, let's make these safer, let's make these changes, blah, blah, blah. And then he ended up dying that weekend. And so I wonder if there's like almost like a martyr aspect for the sport that really carries his legacy forward a lot more than it would have if, you know, that hadn't happened.
Yeah.
You know, not to say that I wish death upon anyone, especially someone like him, but it's interesting to see how death potentially can play a role in the legacy you carry out for future generations.
Yeah. Well, hang on. Let me speak on that. He was huge even before he died, right? So it's not just that he died and then he became famous. This isn't like some people say that Tupac only became famous after he died. I don't think that's the case either. But specifically with Senna, I think the majority of his influence was made before he died, and then there's the continual remembrance afterwards, right? So every charity that he donated to, every Brazilian will know his name.
Right.
And even then, there are other cars made after him. The McLaren Senna is a road car that's named after him. The Senna S's at the Interlagos circuit in Brazil is named after him. I think that he's such an important piece of racing history that he'll never be forgotten. And I think likewise, Max Verstappen will forever be a piece of racing history because he'll never be forgotten unless there's 15 people who win every race in a season in the future. But that's within the sport. Yeah. I think that so far, Senna has had a much larger influence outside of the sport, and so more people would be familiar with his name.
Yeah. I mean, I guess another point, kind of counter to that though, would be like everyone remembers John F. Kennedy, right? And I don't think, even though he was the president and everyone knew him at the time, and even though he was making policies that he thought was the best for the country and trying to make improvements, right? Whatever. I don't know any of the policies he tried to make, but I know John F. Kennedy because he was assassinated.
Yeah.
Right. So there is like a death aspect to a legacy. I think it's like there's almost like a buildup of legacy over time when you have someone great that then's ripped away from the populace, right? Like there's an aspect to legacy that like really carries on that like the pain that people feel when someone great is ripped away from their society, right?
Yeah. I think that it has an influence on legacy, but I don't think it's a necessary aspect, right?
George Washington didn't die, right? But everyone will remember him forever.
Yeah,
right?
Martin Luther King Jr. is another example. I think most of his impacts were made prior to his death. His death was unfortunate, but he still got a lot done. Same with John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, I think, he was making huge impacts with the "We're going to the moon" speech, and with fighting back on the CIA and fighting the Bay of Pigs fiasco. I mean, he did a lot of great things before he died. Maybe people will remember him longer because of the way that he died. So maybe his legacy will be carried on further because of that. But I think that the importance of the work that he did and the intensity of that is maybe more important than how long he's remembered for. I mean, everyone will be forgotten eventually, right?
Right.
But what's the next person you have?
So the next person I have on my list was Enzo Ferrari. I think that he's made a very profound impact on the car community and, obviously the supercar community as well. But I think really importantly, he was not just an example for like how to build a great race car, but he was also an example for someone who strives to be passionate and pursue what he loves relentlessly. Like he built Ferrari so that he could go racing. And then when Henry Ford came along and was like, hey, I want to buy Ferrari and I want part of the racing team, he was like, fuck no, you're not controlling the racing team. Like that is my part. Right. And that's what started the whole Ford versus Ferrari rivalry, right? But like that was someone that stood their ground and like had their values and really stuck to their reasoning for why they started, and someone who had a lot of passion for that, and people still to this day talk about the F40, not just because it's an amazing supercar, but because it was the last car that Enzo Ferrari actually had his hands on and was a part of, right? And so he had this lasting impact on, car culture that I think is going to live on as, beyond even when Ferrari may, end one day. Maybe Ferrari is no more and whatever, and everything's a Tesla. I don't know. But it's like, I think that his legacy will live on, not just because of his influence on the automobile, but also because of his mindset and his drive to really pursue what he loved. So I think that's someone who's really foundational in, in terms of legacies, people who built great legacies. And then connected to that, I have Henry Ford. You mentioned earlier that he kind of revolutionized the assembly line and applied it to the automobile and created something that the masses could be able to afford. I mean, the Model T was between $500 and $550 in like 1918, I think it was, something like that. And, he had this vision for what he wanted to do, and he wanted to help the people around him, and he wanted to get them automobiles and kind of revolutionize travel. And he was able to do it, and by having this passion and drive and continuing to work towards it, he was able to build something that had a lasting impact on the people around him. And I mean, people still today look at Model Ts and go, oh man, that's the first car. And it's like, well, it's not technically the first car, but like that's what people associate it with because it was the first real mass production.
It was the first production
automobile. The Model A was slightly before that. But
from Ford?
Yeah, from Ford.
Got it.
But it was the first, like, I would say mass production car that most of the populace was able to afford and that a lot of people bought, right? So he had this really lasting impact on, you know, humanity and how we commute. And I think that, you know, he was someone that, again, had a vision, drove towards it relentlessly, and really pursued it at all costs. And then I have one business person that I've kind of looked up to quite a lot in the recent years, especially. But Elon Musk, I think, has really changed the game in terms of like business and entrepreneurship and like mindset and like growth strategy. He's looked at these different industries like the car industry and gone, I can create something autonomous that is safer for people and that is fast and fun and has these cool features and that is entertaining and also is, you know, going to be able to expand and revolutionize as we make software to develop the car. So it's like you can continuously update your car and put new features in it and make it safer and all this stuff. And like that was a revolutionary concept. You know, if you go out and buy a Toyota Corolla today, like that Toyota Corolla is the same Toyota Corolla it will be for its entire life. You could have that Toyota Corolla in 10 years and it will still be the same as, you know, obviously more worn, but it will be the same general car as day one when you bought it versus the Tesla is something that you can continue to revolutionize through software updates that, you know, a lot of other cars are not able to do. And then on top of that, he just released, I think it was the iRobot convention. Was that what it was called?
I don't know.
There was a convention of like new age electric stuff, essentially. And he revealed the autonomous taxi on top of his actual like human like robot that like walks around and like chats with people, whatever.
Yeah.
And like this autonomous taxi, he was talking about, and he was like, yeah, at first it's going to be supervised driving, and then it's going to be unsupervised driving, and then you'll just be able to essentially fall asleep and get to your destination. And he was like, it's interesting because out of the 100, I think it's 168 hours in a week, out of those hours, on average, people only spend 10 in a car on average. Something like that.
Interesting.
It was like 10 or 12 around there. But essentially his point was like there's a very small fraction of the time that people actually spend in a car on average. So if you could have autonomous vehicles that are easier and cheaper, then people don't really need to own a car. They can just, you know, essentially grab a car when they need it and then go to where they want to go. And it's a time saver too because you can do your work while you're on the move. You don't have to be actually physically driving. And so he had all these really good points. And as much as I love, you know, automobiles, you know, I love cars. I've owned a couple and, you know, love working on them. But, you know, there is a need for something that saves people time and that is safer for a majority of the populace and that is, you know, easy for them to work on or maintain, especially if it's like a taxi style thing that the company maintains. And so I thought that was a really great concept, and I just love his passion for revolutionizing the world we live in and making improvements step by step to all these different industries. I mean, he bought Twitter and then actually, you know, in my opinion, at least fixed a lot of the, you know, speech issues that were happening on Twitter in terms of censorship and stuff like that. At least he let people talk freely. And then on top of that, just this morning, you sent me the video of the booster landing and being caught by the actual landing pad.
Yeah.
Like that is crazy revolutionary.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you can just see him evolve step by step through this process. And it's like in the beginning, everyone always doubts, but it's about working towards your dreams and your vision and making a lasting and positive impact on the people around you that I think really make the greatest legacies, right? Yeah. We talked earlier about negative legacies. I wouldn't say those are great legacies. I would say those are impactful, you know, legacies or impactful people, right? Yeah. But like great legacies really come from a positive light. And I feel like Elon Musk is definitely someone, on top of, you know, many other entrepreneurs, is someone that really has had a great vision that he's pursued forward relentlessly and pushed past all the obstacles and continues to do so, right? And so that's someone that I personally really admire and look up to when it comes to like legacy thinking.
Well, Elon Musk embodies several of the people who we mentioned previously.
Yes.
Like Henry Ford was the first person to mass produce, well, I mean, the motor vehicle in general, right? And then also mass produce it. Elon Musk was one of the first to create a electric vehicle and was the first to mass produce it, right? And then we talked about the Wright brothers with flight, and then Neil Armstrong with space. And I mean, the first time I saw the Falcon Heavy land on the launch pad in the ocean was like fucking astounding. And today, them catching that booster was even fucking crazier. Like watching that today.
It like leaned in. It all did a whole taper thing to like get right on the pad. Like,
it didn't come straight down. It fucking twisted in.
It like avoided the top of the little arm and then fucking leaned in and then it's crazy.
That makes you think what year were the Wright brothers? They were within 100 years of space travel.
They were early 1900s.
So it was, okay, the Wright brothers and
I believe.
Let's say it's early 1900s. That means that the automobile and airplanes were invented around the same time in the early 1900s. And then in the 60s, we got muscle cars and we went to the moon. And then now Elon Musk is electrifying cars and is changing the game with space travel, right? So the key figures who we have are Henry Ford and the Wright brothers, and then Neil Armstrong and NASA, and maybe Ford again for muscle cars if you'd like. Ferrari, we'll say Enzo Ferrari. And then now we're going through another chapter with Elon Musk. And I'm very happy living in the current time that I am, because there are people who won't recognize that this is a new stage and this is a new chapter.
Yeah.
So like the people living, like when the car was first produced, everyone must have had their jaws on the floor. And when we went to the moon, everyone must have had their jaws on the floor. And yet now I feel that some people don't quite recognize that what Elon Musk is doing is at or above the scale of the Wright brothers and Henry Ford, which is absolutely, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, 100% agree. Do you want to dive into what our legacies will look like?
Sure, yeah. We've spoken about what it takes to form a great legacy, and we've seen how that can be achieved in the real world. But what are we aspiring to? And I want you to go first because mine is interesting. But briefly, did you know that Zach Brown, the CEO of McLaren, has a big car collection, and he only collects cars that have won races?
Interesting. I didn't know that part.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. I was thinking about that during your Ferrari bit, but couldn't squeeze it in.
Yeah. I have a few basic bullet points that then I will elaborate on through our conversation. But I want my legacy the foundation to be with business building. I want to be able to have a business foundation where I've built businesses that help other people and that grow and expand across communities and that really are intertwined with the life that people live in at least the United States, if not greater. I want to be able to give back to the community and help the people around me, help my friends, help my family, help society with products or inventions that aid them throughout their days, and be able to also retire my family. I want them to be able to live the life that they want to live without stress, and I want to be able to help other people start whatever journey they're going on, whether it's business or racing or stuff like that. I think that an important aspect to building that kind of legacy is I need to be able to pursue everything I do wholeheartedly. I think it would be really hard to build a legacy like that by half-assing a bunch of different things. I think it's really important to kind of focus in on one or two things and build those wholeheartedly and really just dial in, right? And then I really want, within all that, to have a racing team with success. I want to be able to be involved in my own racing team to help kids that are going up in the ranks and trying to achieve something greater and get into Formula One or whatever they're trying to go towards, and to kind of help those kids and create a name for myself on the track as the person who's always willing to help, always willing to give people information or tips or tricks or assistance at the trackside or whatever. And then I think that within that, all encompassing is kind of a brotherhood style success is what I envision. It's kind of like a bonding success with the people around me that is then recognized by society because it helps a lot of other people within the community, right? And so that's kind of like the overall overarching legacy that I've envisioned for myself that I want to build.
Do you see kids in there?
Yeah, for sure.
How many?
At least 2.
Interesting.
Yeah, I definitely see kids. I definitely see a family in there. I see a house that's within the hills or the mountainside somewhere, at least one house in the hills or the mountainside where, I have like a private track area and like, they can be exposed to racing and driving and, maybe like a little music studio where they can play around with different instruments because I found that really valuable while I was growing up too. And so I want to at least expose them to that and see if they take it.
Have you seen that Japanese billionaire who has his own private track in the mountains in Japan?
Yeah, you sent it to me.
That looks so fucking cool.
It was so cool.
Yeah, it is
cool. Yeah. But I do envision a luxury like that, but I never want my luxury like lifestyle to negatively impact how I'm able to help people around me.
How so?
Like I don't want people to look at me and go, oh, like he's just the rich billionaire that doesn't pay taxes. Like I want people to look at me and go, oh, he's the rich billionaire and he's always willing to help in some fashion or another, whether it's his personal help or he links me up with someone, like he's always there for me and he's a good dude. Like I really want to have a positive influence on the people around me because I want to leave a positive impact to the people within my community, right? And I think that also tying into that too is I want to be able to teach people, whether that's in business or whether that's with racing or or mentorship or whatever. I want to be able to teach the people around me and help them pursue their goals too, because I pull a lot of value and a lot of energy from seeing other people achieve their dreams that I, had a little part in, right? Or, planted a seed for them that then they grew into something much greater than I even ever imagined.
You see yourself going into politics?
No. I am politically involved in the sense like I do research and I do like a lot of political conversation and I like researching different topics and ideas and being informed or at least, involved, right? But I don't see myself as like a senator or a representative or, a president or something like that. I just don't think that that's I don't think that's my purpose, at least right now. I think my purpose is to help people at a more fundamental, lower level. Like I could maybe see myself as like a county representative, like a mayor, something like that, right? Or at least at that kind of level of influence. But I don't really see myself as like getting so deep into the politics where I am like the head honcho guy that everyone goes to. I think there's a lot of, at least from what I've seen and from my perception of it, there is a lot of corruption within those kinds of fields. And I think it would be a really taxing experience for me to be at like the top of that chain and then have to figure out how to change all these different avenues and to clean up all these different systems and to ensure people actually have good intent rather than ill intent and stuff like that. Like I think that would be, although purposeful, and I think that I could definitely do it because whatever I put my mind to, I'm able to pursue and achieve over the course of time. I think that I could better help on a lower level and also build my own personal family on a lower level rather than thinking too overarching to get into politics.
Right. Yeah, I get that. I've considered that before. Growing up, people told me like, "Oh, you're going to grow up to be a senator," and at the time, I was like, "No." And then when I was in high school, I thought, I mean, shit, if Trump's doing it, I could probably do it. And then I thought about it further, and I was like, honestly, with as much flack as Trump is getting, like, I don't know if I would even want that, you know, because I feel like you can't go into politics without being villainized in some form or fashion, even if it's not true. And that's a difficult burden to bear, I think. If like so many people, like you don't want to walk into a room where everybody in that room hates you, even though you haven't done anything to be hated. You know, they just hate you for like what you represent. That's tough. That's a tough burden to bear.
Yeah. And I think that, especially when you get high up into politics, there are 1,000 different people swinging your stories and perspectives in ways that benefit them personally. Yeah. Right? Like the media will swing it, individuals will swing it, you know, your other representatives that you have to work with will swing it. So it's like your story becomes really, your true story becomes really diluted as it percolates through all the different avenues that other people consume. Right. And so I don't want my story to be diluted and I don't want it to be manipulated for other people's gain. I want the story to come from me and I want people to pull value from that. It's
kind of like how we talked about Michael Jackson earlier. He did a lot for the pop industry and he also touched kids, like a positive and a negative. But you can separate them because you can say what Michael Jackson did for the pop industry, regardless of his personal life, is positive, right? But for as much good as Bill Clinton may have done for the country, there will always be people who can't separate that from the Monica Lewinsky incident and impose the personal values into the Oval Office. And it's interesting because that's one of the rare places I think personal conduct does matter. Because being a president is a full-time job. You're meant to represent your nation. And so your personal values and your personal conduct, I think, should be heavily considered in your impact to the country as well. So whereas with Michael Jackson, I think that I can compartmentalize his pedophile and a pop star separately. I don't think that in political offices you can separate those. I think that in order to be a good politician, you must also be a good person.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. What kind of legacy are you looking to build?
I don't really care.
Interesting.
I don't really mind. I want to have a positive impact on the world, but I don't feel the need to be recognized for it. So, if let's say I solve world hunger, right? I would like world hunger to be solved, but I don't feel the need to have my name attached to it. I would be perfectly happy being, like, if Elon Musk were nameless and faceless, I would be fine with that. I think all I want to avoid is a negative reputation. Like, I don't want a negative reputation. If I get one, I get one. You can't control the media, and I'm not going to try to. I don't really care.
Yeah.
But I don't really feel drawn to that notoriety. I'm not really concerned about who remembers me after I die or how many people know my name. That's not really something that I think about day to day. I think what's more important to me is how I impact people through my actions and how the people closest to me feel. Because if I say something offensive to a stranger, I don't really care because they're a stranger. If I say something offensive, like if I'm trying to offend someone, if I'm trying to offend a stranger, I don't care about their feelings. If I try to offend someone close to me, that hurts me and I want to be self-reflective on that. So I think my circle is much smaller than the broad worldwide circle. I don't care if everybody likes me, but I do care if the people who I am close to like me.
Right.
But
I agree with that.
I think men go through stages through their life. I think they start off being self-centered and egotistical, like the Wolf of Wall Street type of stuff. And I think that some people get stuck there between the ages of 18 and 24, and they don't decide to undergo any personal growth, and they get stuck there. And I think that a lot of successful businessmen and Wall Street people, et cetera, are still stuck in that self-centered egotism. They just want to be like the man. They want to be the alpha or whatever. They don't really care about the difference between good or bad. They just care about whether or not there's money on the other side of it. Those types of people. And then I think the following stage is being success-oriented and just obsessed with that. So they place their goals above their own desires. So I would put Hormozy 5 years ago in that category where he's like, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to hit my goal. I'm not really worried about the mark that I leave on the world. I'm just going to open as many gyms as possible. I'm just going to gym launch. And then I think the final stage is handing off the torch or leaving a legacy and passing on the information. And I think that's what acquisition.com is for Hormozy. Or I'm sorry, School. I think that's what School is for Hormozy. It's how can I pass on all that I have gained to other people? And how can I help other people with that? And I am anticipating that eventually I will have a change of pace and I want to give back to people, but I don't feel like I have enough information to give back to people yet. So I'm not even really concerning myself with it because kind of like the guy who I work with, it's like you don't have much to give other people. And like you went through your life not really building anything and now you want to hand it off to people, but you don't really have much to hand off.
Yeah.
And so I don't give much thought to it just because I don't feel emotionally about it, you know? And so on the topic of kids I asked you about, I feel like frequently people want to have kids for the sole purpose of carrying on the family name and then carrying on that legacy. But when I think about legacies, I mean, do you know anything about Mike Tyson's kid?
No.
What about Michael Jordan's kid? He plays basketball. Did you know that? Didn't even know. Didn't even know. Michael Schumacher's kid, he's in racing, but he's not doing anything super special. Tiger Woods has kids, never heard of them, so on and so forth, right? I feel like that an effective legacy should be one that persists regardless of your offspring. So like Enzo Ferrari's son grew up to take over Ferrari, I think, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And he didn't do anything as impactful.
The only like generational legacy that I can think of, at least right off the bat, is the Earnhardt legacy.
Who's
there was
that?
Earnhardt Sr., the NASCAR driver. Very, very
Oh,
famous.
Earnhardt.
Earnhardt Sr. was the
Yeah.
older guy. Then there was Dale Earnhardt, and then there was Dale Earnhardt Jr.,
Yeah.
who's, still involved with racing as far as I know.
Yeah.
And so those three guys, the Earnhardt family has had a legacy
Yeah.
through NASCAR, but it's very few and far between that I think like the kids continue the legacy of the parents.
Dynasties, like
Yeah,
the Chinese dynasty
true.
and the Kim Jong
Different
dynasty,
kind of legacy.
different kind of legacy, not
Yeah.
really one that I want to have.
Right.
But I think ultimately the reason that I'm not so taken by that perspective is because it would fucking break my heart if I had a kid to carry on my legacy and I raised that kid exactly the way I wanted to and I instilled all the right values in him and ultimately it wound up that he was just a dick or a serial killer or not motivated. He held all the same values but didn't have a work ethic. Like if the kid doesn't live up to exactly what I want it to be, I'll be upset about it because then my legacy isn't being carried on. And then I'm going to take that out on the kid and that's not fair to them. Right? Because they're being their own person, and that's exactly what it should be. I think that I struggle to see that. I don't want a kid for any other reason. So like carrying on the legacy would be the only reason. But I think that if I'm going to build the type of legacy that I admire, it is not reliant on having a kid to take it on.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't really want kids to carry on my legacy. I want kids because I want the experience of having my own kids. Like raising my own kids and having a family.
I asked in the context of like carrying on a legacy.
Oh,
not like you shouldn't have kids, but
yeah, no, I'm not really concerned about like them having the same path I do or carrying on what I do. Mm-hmm. Like they can choose to live the life the way they want to. I will try to instill good values in them, and I think that I will because I think I have some decent values and I at least have some decent communication skills that I'm continuing to build.
Yeah,
but. I want the experience of having a family.
Yeah.
Like more than just like, a girlfriend or wife.
Right.
Right.
I feel like frequently when I say I don't want to have kids, many people will say like, "Oh, you want your family name to end with you?" And it's like, well, like I don't care.
Yeah.
Or they don't want someone to carry on your name or legacy, and I'm like, no. Like
I usually tell people maybe. Like I usually just kind of leave it open because it's not really like their business and like. I don't really care what they think anyway.
Yeah.
But
the answer can change, right?
Yeah,
it might be one thing today, and it might be something totally different
I used
tomorrow.
to not really want kids, and then I sort of didn't. Or then I sort of did, and like, then I was like 50-50, and now I'm like, no, like eventually I definitely want kids.
Yeah. And money might totally change that, for me at least. Because right now, my primary reason for not wanting a kid is I don't have the money or the time. I won't make either. Right. So I won't have a kid. But if I have got all the time and money in the world, maybe.
I hear that.
But it changes based on the day.
What if you were trying to leave one thing behind for your legacy, what do you think you would try to leave behind?
Like after I die?
Yeah, like a one word or like a phrase or like a emotion. Like what would you really want to leave behind?
For who?
I don't know. That's a good question because you said you don't really care about how other people view it, right?
Right.
So you don't care that you have a legacy or not?
No, I think that I want my friends and family to remember me for who I was, but I think if I died today, I don't think that you would remember me with a single word or phrase or meaning. I think that you would think about me as you know me as a person, and that's complex, right? I think that if a stranger were to hear that I died, I don't really care if they have that one word or one phrase or one attribute because they never knew me.
That's a good point.
But I think about this semi-frequently because Hormozy seems to be, he thinks about death a lot and he thinks about how he'll be remembered and he flips back and forth between whether or not it's important to him. And I've never thought about it and gone like, oh man, like I really hope that I'm remembered after I die because eventually, no matter what, I'll be forgotten anyways. So what's the difference between being forgotten the day after I die and 100 years after? Because I'll be dead anyways. So what's it matter? So I want to leave a positive impact on the world. I would like the world to be in a better place when I die than when I was born, and I'd like to be that as a result of what I've done, but I don't feel like I need to take the credit for it.
Cool point. I like it.
Sweet.
Time for a dial in.
Let's wrap it up. We end each episode with a single quote to summarize what we've been talking about today and get you focused. We're about to go back to work, so should you. So this is my quote for today. It's a Warren Buffett quote. And this is speaking on everything we talked about today, about legacy, about building something that can be carried on after you die. Someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. Thanks for listening.